Hi, this is Ryan Saddam, the Chief Experience Officer at Client Savvy. Welcome to another knowledge sharing module that's produced by the CXPS community. Welcome. Those of you who are members, we bring to you this week Stephen Keith, the founder of CX Pilots, who's talking about building a high-performance CX culture. Really fascinating stuff, and we have some great mural activities inside our mural to go along and support this. We hope you'll join us in mural. We also will be doing a live Q&A with Stephen this Friday, so you'll have a chance to ask all of your questions and hear from him as well. And we'll have, of course, our breakout time where you can meet and network with your peers and further the conversation with others who are on their CX journeys as well. Those of you who are watching this and aren't yet members of the CXPS community, we do hope that you will join us. You can learn more about our organization at clientexperience.org. And that's how you get access to a cohort of peers, these online engagement activities, and the live Q&As. So please join us for those. Before I turn this over to Stephen, I do want to take just a moment and say thank you to our sponsors. Without you, we could not make this happen, and we very much appreciate your commitment to client experience and this community. And now at this point, I would like to turn this over to Stephen. Stephen, thank you very much, and take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. So today we're talking about building high performance cultures of CX. So I want to go through some fundamentals. I want to talk through a brief story that shows a little bit of contrast. And then I want to talk about how we build one. So how important is culture to your organization? And I think everybody would argue that it's very important. Typically 100% of the people say it's important. That's no surprise to anyone. But how many leaders underestimate the value of strong cultures? And we've been keeping track of this for several years. We find that roughly 69, 70% of the people are underestimating the value of strong cultures. How well do we understand our work cultures? Turns out not very well. And when we say understand our work cultures, do we understand the underpinnings and the mechanics of high functioning cultures? You might be wondering how many leaders claim they have better than average work cultures. Again, it's no surprise. Most organizational leaders believe that they have a really strong working culture. But what's interesting, when you ask the employees that work with those same leaders who believe overwhelmingly that they have really strong working cultures, 9%, according to our research, reflect that. That means the other 90-ish% of the people don't believe that they have as strong culture as their executive and leadership teams believe they do. So what's going on here? What we find is when we're looking at what makes a really strong culture of CX and what doesn't, there are a couple things that we misunderstand about these cultures. One, what makes a culture, the composition. Two, the role of surrender, like what's in our power, what's not in our power. What can we change, what can't we change? Engagement, how do you fuel willingness in people? Exchange, that's just what you give versus what you get. Leadership, how do you lead? It turns out it matters quite a bit to those that are led. Purpose, why are we all really here? I mean, that's a really profound question. And in building high performance CX cultures, turns out that's one of the more important things. Access, people are thinking, can I get what I need from whomever I need? Or do I have to go through a bunch of obstacles? Transparency, can I be trusted to see everything or not? And inclusion, am I really on this team? These are things that turn out to be some of the most misunderstood elements of high-performing cultures. So let's look at the common attributes of a high-performance CX culture. Now, we've been studying these for close to 20 years, and what we've learned over the course of a lot of this work is the common attributes of high performance CX cultures have these things in common. They're outcome oriented. They're thinking with the end in mind, and they're reverse engineering to the extent that they can see what types of outcomes they need to pursue and what it takes for a culture to be a part of that pursuit. Distributed authority. That means, can we push authority for decision makings down and out to the edges where more people on the front lines actually have the authority to make a decision that matters? They're unified on purpose. Everybody knows exactly what we're all here to do. There's no question. And we're firmly behind that. We hear the rallying cry, we're on board, and so on. They share an expansive view of CX. To us, CX is an equation. And what we've learned is a lot of organizations miss part of that equation. So if you're only looking at a little bit of it, you're missing some of it. Turns out culture is oftentimes part of that missing equation piece. And that's something that we know that we need to address. They're experience-led. That means they're focused on the levers of experience on the employee and on the client side. And they know what they need to do in order to lead the organization with the tenets of experience. They're data focused. They're looking at data like they've never done before. They're collecting client feedback. They're collecting employee feedback. They're using that as the basis to make really wise decisions. They're highly collaborative. They go out of their way to make sure that people are on teams, they're focused, and that they're removing all the obstacles necessary. They're curious and knowledge hungry. They have the capacity to look at the soft side of CX. All too often, when we're thinking about cultures, especially cultures of high performance CX-driven organizations, we learn that if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. That's not always the case in working with cultures of high performance CX-oriented organizations. Sometimes the soft side is just as important. And we're investing in learning relationships. That means we are trying to learn more about who our employees and clients are as we know they're trying to learn about us. So there's a reciprocal learning component to that. Now, what are the 6 memorable E's of CX cultures? When we're working with organizations, what we try to do is help them create a basic structure. So environment, these are the feelings that one has about one's their place within a place. Engagement, their depth of willingness to join in. The exchange, what do you get from what you give? And when you get a whole bunch of people who you know are asking the question, what am I getting out of this? You have to think about what their answer to that must be. Expectations, that's the felt difference between anticipate and receive. So thinking about how you are dealing with the expectations of employees and how employees are organized to think about how your clients look at anticipating and receiving services, products, etc. Emotions, these are simply the feelings in the context of all these E's. And experience, it's the sum of all interaction outcomes. Now, I want to tell you a really interesting high contrast story between 2 people who were focused on culture within an organization in the context of trying to become more experience-led. On the left, you have Margot. Margot's HR director, 77-year-old engineering firm, 100-person, 115-person shop. Margot's highly trained, really smart, University of Kentucky MBA, 19 years in this position within the same firm. Margot is, we like to call her a little bit more old school. A quote that we captured from Margot, I just want to make sure we don't try to boil the ocean with this culture stuff. Our culture is very strong and our people love it here. Now I want to contrast that with Leanne. Leanne on the right side is the chief culture officer, 32-year-old engineering firm, 153-person shop. She has a BS in biology from Duke University, and she's only been in this position for 3.5 years. She used to be a business development director at Gensler in San Francisco. She has a different way of looking at this stuff. She says, culture is a journey for us, and we're nowhere near our potential yet, investing in culture. It's less about foosball tables and 9 beers on tap, and more about pushing authority down and out to the edges. I've worked hard to train our leadership to treat culture as a bottom line concern. So you can see the 2 different ways that these 2 people are looking at this. Margot, just to go a little bit deeper, Margot says that culture is what it is. You can't change culture. The owner sets the culture and everybody follows. We're all struggling to recruit these days. We're within the norms of our employee turnover. Culture is really mostly about HR, and we're all just really lucky to have jobs. Leanne doesn't see it this way. Leanne's thinking culture needs to be magnetic. She thinks of it in terms of how can we attract? Like, what are the forces of attraction? We all have power to improve our culture. It needs to be open and transparent. Recognition is the key ingredient. We're going to go into that in a little more detail. Our culture is why we have a waiting list instead of an open head count. When she's talking about recruitment, she's doing something right, because that's the way it is at her firm. Culture is a boardroom concern, and our culture is designed to be diverse and inclusive. Now, after working with these 2 firms for quite a while, let's look at what happens as the result. So working with Margot's firm, 6% average annual revenue growth, 20% annual employee turnover. Employee engagement ranks about 3.1 out of 7. Average employee utilization, 78%. Revenue per full-time employee, $163,000. Now, we know Leanne has a completely contrasting way of dealing with this, designing value and quality into culture. What's happened in her side? Leanne has 19% annual average revenue growth as opposed to Margot's 6%, 1% annual employee turnover as opposed to Margot's 27%. Employee engagement is 6.7 out of 7, almost unheard of, as opposed to 3.1. Average employee utilization at Leanne's firm, they don't track it anymore. And instead, they've replaced it with a way to share accountability and measure how people are meeting the things that they're accountable for, as opposed to 78%. Revenue per full-time employee at Leanne's engineering firm, $289,000, as opposed to Margot's $163,000. So you can see different approach, different mindset, different ideology, different results. That tells us something. Now, when we go into this next part, we're going to show you, how does Leanne think about this? How did we help Leanne build a high-performance CX culture? Well, as we move along, the first thing is set cultural expectations. And when you set cultural expectations, you have to anticipate change. So the thing that people oftentimes get wrong is they think about building culture as a structure that's not going to move, and it needs to be deeply rooted in a strong foundation. That's not the case. You have to expect and anticipate change. Make sure that the work that you're doing on your culture will be a part of that change. Make everything clear. This seems so obvious. Not always the case. Make everything about your culture open. Make it so you understand what it is that you want people to get out of this. Write it down. Incentive clarity. Make sure it's clear what the give and get is in this culture. Talk about incentives openly. Use stories to help illustrate what incentives look like inside of this culture. And then the fourth element is document expectations. So as we said, write it down, make it something that people can follow and access. The second thing that I want to talk about is perfect your systemic processes. 1, employee lifecycle mapping. Map out what it's like to be an employee of the firm. Map out everything, what it felt like for that person before they got there, when they were onboarded, when they're doing their work, when they were promoted, and so on. Second, talent design. How do we design the talent that we know that we want within the firm? Third, onboarding. What's the process? that we use to onboard new clients? And what culture do we have that will ensure that the onboarding experience is the best? Fourth, recognition. What are the processes that we use to recognize people who are playing a highly valuable part of a high performance culture, and make sure that we get everybody to understand that? The third element under culture is leadership. Create an owner's mindset. What that means is make everybody feel like they own a piece of this. If you're not literally an employee-owned firm, make people feel like they are making key decisions and they have part of that owner's mindset. The second is orient toward growth. Cultures that don't orient toward growth are cultures that tend to just remain static. Everybody needs to think about, how are we moving this thing forward? Third, instill and reward curiosity. By instilling and rewarding curiosity, it means that we're always striving to find out the next way to do things better. And we're rewarding people for asking really good questions about this. Next is lead by example. The best way to destroy all the gains you've made in a really strong high performance culture is to have your leadership do something else because they're leadership and it doesn't apply to them. I assure you, best way to kill your efforts. Getting them to lead through their examples is really one of the strongest ideas. Now let's go to the fourth thing, recruiting. Leverage client feedback. Client feedback is oftentimes, we call it the fuel of CX and EX inside of these CX cultures. Getting feedback, closing loops, making sure that you have all the materials that you need to make good decisions. Make sure that those data come from the source. Next, employee experience mapping. Similar to employee lifecycle map, employee experience map just focuses on what it's like to be an employee here. When you're recruiting, give potential new recruits a map of what it's like to become an employee. Show them like the culture of this organization can best be illustrated through mapping what that experience looks like. Try it. It's a really powerful tool. The third thing under recruiting is inclusion. So are we thinking about how to be inclusive? And I don't mean inclusive in a little box, little I inclusion. I mean, are we including more people into more initiatives and tasks and strategies and activities than we might initially think we're comfortable? But inclusion has multiple meanings. Diversity. Are we thinking about diversity? And we're not just talking about diversity in the big D sense. We're talking about diversity in ideas, diversity in backgrounds, diversity in color, diversity in all range of diversity. Moving on to the next thing, tools. So remote visual collaboration tools. So high performing CX cultures are using highly functional collaborative tools like Mural or Miro, or there's a myriad of them. Next, teaming technologies. We're using Microsoft Teams and Slack and those types of things. Building strong cultures is eliminating the things that make being apart from one another feel like that problem or obstacle doesn't exist. Through these tools, we're actually we're building closer connections with everyone. And the third tool I want to talk about is journey mapping. It's through journey mapping, and we're not talking just about client journey mapping. We're talking employee journey mapping, leadership, employee leadership mapping, onboarding mapping process, but using tools, sophisticated tools to enable us to do that. Let's jump down to enablement. Enablement is about everybody's on the same page. Are we enabling everyone with the same set of tools and access to be a high functioning contributor to the team? Training. Oftentimes training is something that makes it so that we are either equipping people with the stuff that they need to do their job, or we're not. And so enable training to be a key component of your culture. Distributed authority. This is really important. High-performing CX cultures have figured this out. When you push authority down and distribute it out to people who have frontline connections, and you trust them, keyword there, trust. You trust them to make the right decisions. If they don't, that's a learning experience. But you don't keep the decision up in the the mid-levels and leadership ranks. You start to give them more authority down in the ranks. That's how you start to build high-performing CX cultures that are pervasive throughout the entire culture. Let's jump over to the next box, feedback. So we've talked a little bit about leveraging client feedback. We're talking about client feedback looping now. So this is the process of gathering the client feedback, building cultures that are strong and high performing are cultures that share in the curiosity about what your customer is trying to accomplish. What are their expectations? What are their experiences? What are the gaps between? And how do we deal with those? The next thing is employee feedback looping. So we're just taking that same power and the mission critical task, pointing it inward. Are we maintaining a high level of curiosity about employees and what their experience is? Next is recognition. It's the second time we've brought up recognition, but feedback is tied to recognition in a different way. Are we recognizing people that are A, doing the work to gather the feedback, B, getting good feedback? And by good, I don't just mean it's positive and people are fanatical about someone. Is it a learning opportunity? Are they doing the things associated with learning and growing? And if they are, we reward those types of behaviors. And then lastly, transparency. And by transparency, we mean, are we getting comfortable with candor? We're moving into a place where different people in different age groups are starting to have different concerns about the ways that we work or the ways that we communicate or other methodologies. Are we having candid conversations with them? Are we as leaders, we as middle managers, we as frontline employees, are we all comfortable with figuring out what the tensions are, if there are any, and are we addressing them appropriately? Open everything, the books, the goals, the way that we approach things, all of the information about the feedback that we're gathering from clients and employees, to the extent possible, open everything so that everybody can see that. Who's meeting their goals? Who needs help? How can we share accountabilities to help those who are not meeting their goals meet them? That's how you build a lattice work of highly collaborative, high functioning people focused on the experience. And then lastly, this is one of the things that Leanne really focused on is filter out exclusion. So find exclusion, who feels like they're not part of the system, not part of the culture, and fix it. Figure out across the entire organization, where does exclusion hide and quash it? I want to go to the next slide where we want to talk about what usually goes wrong first. So even the most well-intentioned people who are focused on high-performing CX cultures, they tend to run into the same obstacles. And as we said earlier, doing this for a couple of decades, we see some of the same patterns. So we're able to intervene and help people with these. Nonetheless, these happen. Managers don't hire people with a growth mindset. So they don't hire people who know that they need to do certain things to help move the company forward or to find new and invigorating and innovative ways to approach certain things or improve processes. Expectations are not set early and firmly. So as you can imagine, it's easy to not be super clear about all the expectations. And in lieu of those, we just have kind of friendly conversations and, we just think, well, they probably understand. Not the case. You have to set them early, set them firmly, and make sure that they're explicitly communicated. Training managers aren't well trained. This third bullet point is is damning for a lot of organizations. We assume that because Larry or Daryl or Jennifer have been training all of the onboards for the last 16 years, that they're the best people to do that. When we don't think about how effective is Larry and Daryl and Jennifer in doing this. It turns out we should be looking at how well we're training our trainers and make sure that they have all the important information. Next, leadership continually operates on a need-to-know basis. This isn't working anymore. So if we're not open and transparent about all the things, it's going to be significantly more complicated to build these diverse and inclusive, high-performing CX cultures, because the people that have the greatest growth potential are going to be thinking, yeah, I don't have that information, or I wasn't invited to that meeting, or list of excuses goes on and on. Recognition isn't delivered authentically or often. So many firms do the same thing. They have recognition Thursday, or, we're going to set aside this time to, every month we have like employee of the month or something like that. Many firms still do that. Turns out not the best way to do it. It's not authentic. It means that we always have to select someone on a timed basis to check off that, recognition was delivered. Instead, if we're delivering recognition authentically and we're doing it often, we're spot checking all of the different things to find opportunities to point at someone who did a really phenomenal job. And we're helping everybody understand that's the type of behavior that requires reward or recognition, and that we're spending time and energy gathering the wagons and the tribe around. That's what we want to do more of. That's how you build those cultures. Not hiring for diversity and inclusion. That's, as we all know what's going on in our environments, that's stuff that we have to be focused on more. I think that's fairly well evident. Expectations and communications lag change. So this is something that stops really great firms from achieving that sort of high performance realm. And it's that things change, and the way that they set expectations and communicate about those things are so far back behind. And that's something that you can't really continue to expect to work if you're not keeping your communications and your expectations aligned with the stuff that's really going on in the firm. A good example is M&A. In those types of major shifts, there's so much stuff that you need to communicate, and there's so much stuff that you need to do to meld those cultures. If you're not doing that, or the way that you're communicating is lagging behind the events of any type of M&A event, it's going to be disastrous for both cultures. Innovation is a mirage, or we're just playing lip service. So one of the things that we see having immediate destructive disruption to well-intentioned firms who are focused on building high-performance CX cultures is they say that they're innovative, they're not actually doing the work, and 80% of the people in the organization just immediately see it. They think it's complete BS, and that erodes progress, and it deteriorates trust in being part of these high-performance cultures. So if you're going to use a term like innovative, you have to really make sure that you're paying it off. So moving along, the top challenges, again, these are the things that we see, the greatest challenges that people have in doing this stuff. Post M&A, bringing one culture into another, oil and water. So we see this company seems to have a really strong culture. Everybody really likes each other. This one seems to be a little more old school. How do we bring them together? That's a massive challenge. There's a lot of work that goes into tailoring both of those cultures so that we're doing the right work to ensure that we're getting the best connection of those two cultures. And we're actually building porous cultural borders to make it one. Creating then maintaining a culture of inclusion and diversity, that is challenging. So understanding how are you going to make the steps to ensure that we're trying to aggressively find people from different cultures to make us a more creative, more expansive and thinking organization, more interdisciplinary in all of our processes and ways of doing things. Another great challenge is creating an immersive employee experience for all. So by that, are we thinking about how we're designing talent and how we're figuring out what our organization needs to continually enhance and build these really high performing cultures, or are we not? Immersive, creating that immersion event is how do we bring more people where they are into the culture that we know that we want to have and make them feel a strong sense of community and being there, and illustrate clearly that we value their contribution in ways that we authentically value, and that there are certain things that we may need to tweak, or there may be some tensions that we need to address. Nonetheless, we're being immersive about that. Fourth thing, creating an intimacy. So as we've all been sort of shoved out into our respective home offices doing this work, one of the things that we've lost in a lot of cases is intimacy, in how we feel comfortable sharing ideas or talking to different people, or our different patterns of collaboration. One of the things that we have to do as firms, if we want to create and maintain these high performance CX cultures, is figure out how do we get that intimacy back? How are we helping people at the edges not feel alienated? How are we bringing them in? Turns out it's fairly prescriptive. There are very simple things that we can do to address that. Next, building relationships remotely across boundaries. So similar to the point before, how are we looking at relationship growth? How are we learning more about all the people on our teams, between leadership and employees and executives and clients and stuff? How are we figuring out how we're erasing the obstacles that exist as we've all gone remote, and addressing those? And some people have to do that across different country boundaries. Leaders confuse cordial with connected. So one of the top challenges is you get people who are very kind, polite, cordial, smiling. You believe that's the most accessible indicator that they're contributing, or at the very least not deteriorating a strong high performance culture. But we can't confuse cordial with being totally connected. So we have to focus on the connection part, and not use false positives about people smiling and saying, yes, I'm fine, as an indicator that they're actually where they need to be. Next, information isn't disseminated for equal access. One of the best things that you can do to address this top challenge is to commit to sharing more information more openly with more people, to a surprising degree even. One of the things about Leanne's organization is they knowledge-based virtually everything. Everybody had every single detail about the company's P&L, how well everybody was doing in their respective departments, all out in the open, ready for conversation. And lastly, executives tolerate cultural terrorism trade-offs, and they pay that ransom. So I think we've all been part of organizations where there's one cultural terrorist. I think people have even written books about it. They call it the asshole of the organization. Those are people that are typically high performing rainmakers, but they know they are, so it's okay for them to be a terrorist. It's okay for them to be exclusionary. It's okay for them to act sort of out on the fringe, and without thinking that there's going to be any punishment for that. And that's just not the case. That sends an immediate reverberation down into the depths of the culture, where people feel, If I do one really super great thing, I too get to be a terrorist. We just don't want to do that. So what can we do immediately with no or very low budgets next Monday to take advantage of some of these ideas? One, a cultural assessment. Let's measure how everyone feels. Relatively simple, straightforward, low-cost way to actually ask people how they are across several different dimensions. Two, create a culture charter. Create a little booklet. What do we want our culture to be like? Ask everybody. Get everybody's ideas. Pull them together. Share it. Use it as a basis of conversation. Three, make working culture a boardroom issue. Try to get as many of the people at the leadership level to talk about where are we at with our culture, and not allow themselves to be part of that, high 80% of thinking that your culture is a lot better than you believe it is. Four, concentrate on culture for remote people. So as more people are going remote, how do we make sure they're not being left behind? And again, we can't confuse them being cordial, like, yes, I'm fine. I'm way over here and I'm doing just fine, when we know they might not be. So it's something that you should really think about. What are some extra steps you can do? Great idea. Teams who are in different offices or at home offices, find a snack pack or a simple gift that you can send out to everybody, and everybody opens it at the same time when they're on their next call. Open all meetings with 5 minutes of culture exploration. I think a lot of us are doing this, but are we asking the right questions? Are we asking questions that immerse people deeper into that sort of culture of willingness and belonging and aspiration? Start out with 5 minutes of, maybe, ask people, where was the most exotic place that you've been that you want to return to, and what would you do differently the next time you go? Something like that. You learn a lot about how people think about culture, and then you can apply that to your own. Articulate the importance of a growth mindset-led culture. Really important. A lot of times we say we want to grow, or we have revenue targets. We just assume that everybody understands that. But when we start to unpack that growth mindset and get everybody on board with what's your role in trying to drive us to that growth mindset, what does that look like? How do you think that feels? What do we all need to do differently to achieve that? And how does our culture play a role in that? Next, stop negotiating with cultural terrorists. Several of our clients have them. They bring in millions of dollars. They've been doing it for 50, that's an exaggeration, many decades. And they feel like they don't need to do things the way that everyone else does. It's horribly, it's a horrible idea to keep that going inside of an organization. Next, teach everyone how to spot and address cultural tensions head on. One of the things that we like to do is create a triangulation process. So you spot the tension, you address the tension, and then you communicate how that tension was spotted and addressed. And you get everybody involved in all sides of the tension to all communicate about how they saw it, what they did, and what they're doing differently. Set an example. Set an example of how a gripe to be escalated and addressed. So when you set an example, you say, we saw this thing, we addressed it like this, and we moving forward, here's how our expectations have changed. So one of the things that we do, sometimes we quietly solve an HR issue because it's nobody's business. Well, in a lot of cases, everybody's going to find out anyway. What you do is set an example. This was an issue. We've agreed to talk about it openly, and this is how we dealt with it. That does a lot for growing these, for opening up the doors, being transparent, and moving forward. And lastly, reward standout cultural contributions. So If someone's doing something amazing, they're doing something that helps us feel an expanded sense of purpose, and it reverberates throughout the culture, stop and celebrate that. Take the time to point at it, talk about it. So you're setting an example for a lot of people to understand, oh, so that's what it's like to create, to move forward and to enhance the culture. So that's something that we rarely do. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. There are literally hundreds of ideas that cost virtually nothing to do. I encourage you to think like Leanne and think more openly and expansively about how CX plays a role in building these high performance cultures, and then think about what it means to make them better. My name's Stephen Keith. I'm from CX Pilots. If you would like to get a hold of us, we'd be more than happy to continue the dialogue.
Wow, Stephen, thank you so much. That was a lot of great insight. I love the way how you take complex problems or situations and distill them down with microscopic precision to the component parts. The way you broke down what goes into a high performance culture really was insightful. And I'm glad that we have that roadmap on identifying what areas in our firms we need to work on. We have that roadmap in this week's mural activity. So if you are a CXPS member, please jump into the mural and start contributing from your perspective, what's working well in your firm, and sharing stories and successes of how those things are working. We will have a live Q&A with Stephen this Friday, so please make sure you register for that so you don't miss out on the opportunities to ask your questions and to engage with other members of CXPS in our networking time. And those of you who are not yet members of CXPS, we welcome you to join us. Please go to clientexperience.org to learn more about this community and find a way to join. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.